So to the last and final session, which is taking 20 minutes, it's going to be exciting. An expert all the way from FIFA and one who also works with Flashscore. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce to you the two gentlemen who are talking about profiling and benchmarking in sports. Very, very key. Let me invite onto the platform to join me a journalist with 3 Sports Media of Media General. He also is the country manager and writer for Flashscore.com and sometimes for Apta. Also does plenty of things for the Ghana Premier League and multiple sports across the country. Help me welcome with an applause, Owuraku Ampofo. He has a fantastic nickname. Styling job. Right, brilliant guy. Okay, so then, joining him for this one is a high performance specialist from FIFA. He's been around the world, not only Africa. He's been to Qatar, he's been to Asia, been to Europe, and on the African continent, helping football federations to develop, helping them to go by what FIFA has prescribed as the way to go. His name, Abdul Faisal Chibsah. Yeah, so they're going to be having this conversation about the profiling and benchmarking. And to join them, to drive the conversation, please, with a round of applause, help me invite myself, Sitsofe Atsrim. Okay, so, go your mic. Brilliant. MC, I can work with this from this angle. Is he audible? Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Mic test. I think I'm good.
Hello?
I can hear myself, so I'm okay.
Yeah, I'll manage this. Don't worry. Boys, freestyle. All right, so am I audible? Can you hear me? All right, let's start the conversation now. It's an important topic, profiling and benchmarking in sports. But Chips, I'll start with you. What is profiling in respect to sports?
Yeah, look, I can just answer that simply by giving an example. We lost a host, okay, for this panel, and we had to pick somebody who's already here to fit in that position. So we begin to look around, and that's us profiling there, right? So just a quick example with that, we chose you because we thought.
Give it up for me.
Yeah, let's give it up for Sito.
Brilliant.
Because we thought you have the skill set that would really fit into the conversation that we're about to have. And that's simply what profiling means. Just understanding some strengths and weaknesses of an individual, a team, not just sports, but in company also. You know, wherever you work in, you need to understand what you have and what you don't have. And that's a quick example of profiling.
How about benchmarking?
Benchmarking, on the other hand, I would say, again, I'll give a good example. We all know where we are and the journey you're about to take on and where you want to be, right? So there is always a doubt about what's considered to be good. What are the performance norms that are accepted worldwide that everybody aspires to reach? So if I look at where I am now and I have a target set, that's me benchmarking my performance now, my attributes to the target that I've set to myself. And that can be very dangerous because if you ask 1,000 people now what's the definition of good, or what a good player looks like, or what a good businessman looks like, I'm sure we are going to have different ideas and different answers to it. But until we sample, a large quantity to understand the average of that, then, benchmarking becomes really sort of at a touchy place. That if it's not done properly, then we'll be dealing with, wrong facts and wrong figures there. So benchmarking really is targets that we set to ourselves, that we aspire to reach in whatever it is that we are doing.
Right. I mean, let's talk about, you didn't give me a wrong mic. Trying, perfect. All right, so now let me zoom it straight into talent development. What are some of the key aspects you're considering when you're profiling to identify talents that are fit for purpose?
The easiest one would possibly be physical profiling. So, you're looking for a talent. I'll narrow it down to football because that's where I work. So forget about, sorry about the others in other sports. You can do your own benchmarking and profiling. But if I bring it to football, the easiest one would be the physical profiling of a player. So you go to a game, You have your own players that you admire. You have Messi, we have Asian, we have Stephen Appiah. And the easiest way to separate who is who is to look at their physical stature. Some are tall, some are small, some are technical on the ball. So that for me is easy. But there's one important one that's tough to measure, and that's the mental profiling. Again, obviously this is not something you can quantify easily. But those are the ones that if you're not paying much more attention, the ones that you can easily quantify becomes a problem. And it requires special tools, sometimes data. Our guys from Opta are here. They know very well about what I'm speaking about, but those are some of the easy aspects that need to be taken into consideration. Some you can easily quantify, some you can't quantify, but you still have to find a way to measure those metrics.
Then I come to Owuraku now. As a broadcaster, as a journalist, how do you, in reporting or going about your job, how do you profile, athletes? How do you profile them in terms of what are the aspects you use in profiling them?
Well, I think Chibsah has said a lot with regards to the topics, and when it comes to the topic of profiling athletes, as you mentioned, is basically looking at the strengths and weaknesses of players, and then you benchmark, create your framework to ensure that you are either improving the strength or also making sure that the weakness is not too much of a weakness. With how this applies to my job is that the thing about being a journalist is that in as much as you would want to be subjective, you would want to give your opinion, there has to be some form of objectivity. And that's where you look at the profiling and then perhaps benchmarking as well. One aspect of my job is projections. And in order to do something like that, you do need data. So let me just give you an example. When Chris Hughton was appointed as Black Stars coach a couple of years ago, I was one of the few people, I don't know if there were a few or a majority, but I immediately said he wasn't going to do well.
No, you're one of the few, I tell you. If that is what you said.
Yeah, because there was no sample size, and there was also that caveat that he hadn't worked since he left Brighton, which was a long time ago, so we don't know what he's learned. So a lot of my projections was based on what I saw during his time. Now, how was I able to make this conclusion? It was through profiling. I looked at Chris Hughton, how his teams play, what his philosophy is as a coach, and basically the principles that underscored his good performances in his coaching career had to be built on a strong defensive foundation. And so immediately I knew that with the profile of players that we have in the Black Stars, there's a mismatch because the strength in the current team has nothing to do with the defense. It's all going forward. It's unlike the Black Stars of 10, 15 years ago where we had Essien, Appiah, Muntari, Antoniana, and all these guys in midfield where Milo can come and then just shut up everyone and just get one goal and win. And so that I was able to make such a projection looking at the profiles of our players and also the profile of our coach. And then one aspect of it is also analysis. Analysis in the sense that you are able to suggest solutions in matches. For instance, it wouldn't make sense if a coach is playing a striker of a profile who wants to play as a false nine and drop deep, and his wingers also are ball to feet, want to drop into the midfield and play with the ball. In essence, you don't have any penetration power because no one is making the runs behind or making use of the space which is left behind in the striker. So I think basically it's just these two components, analysis and then projections in the journalism field.
I'll still stay with you on this one. But of course, I'll ask Chibsah too, but what are some of the key considerations in establishing performance norms?
Well, I think for me, the first thing is that you probably have to be nuanced because you are creating what the standard is. That in itself is different from every team, every coach. For instance, if I give a simple test to everyone here that jump over this TV, and that is the benchmark, that's the standard to determine whether you're a good jumper or not. 90% of the people could jump, But the truth is that I do not get enough insight on how to improve each person's jump, because you're looking at the sample here and it's so different. There are people who are in their 40s, there are people who are in their teens, there are people who are male, there are people who are female. So you need to make sure that there's that categorization when you are setting these standards to be able to perhaps better suggest solutions. And that way you are able to create a framework that works with developing, whether it's the athletes or whichever way that you find yourself. And also, one way that you can also ensure that your performance norm is of good quality is that there is work out there, there's the standard out there. And so, for instance, when Ibrahim Osman signed for Brighton, there are various models that ensures that you are able to make projections on players. And so it compares him to, let's say, under 21 wingers around the world. And after such a comparison, the most similar player that he was with at that moment, you're looking at someone like Jamal Musiala. And so you ask yourself that, what is it that Musiala needed to do to reach where he is? Right. Or how do you improve someone like Musiala? And so once you do have that benchmark and it's specific, then you can sort of develop that framework for someone like Ibrahim Osman. And also, I think it's continuous education, improvement, and just making sure that, the sports that we see today won't be the sports tomorrow. Now we're seeing a lot more infiltration of technology. Those times, there wasn't so much available data. Now, if you look at the Black Stars training, you see that they are all wearing these vests. Yeah, they're not just for fashion. They're taking a lot of physical traits, attributes, speed, their stamina, distance covered, so many physical attributes for them to make informed decisions. So in the next 5 years, who knows? There might be another innovation, and then you have to rework your framework as well. So I think those are some of the things you have to consider.
Chibsah, same question?
No, I would just add to what Owuraku said, and he mentioned a key consideration, which is the sample size. This can be dangerous. We are all just as good as the environment we live in, right? And we live in a global world. We play in a global sport, like football is played everywhere. And if the only thing we can measure is our environment, sometimes it can be very tricky, because we want to understand how good we are. And the definition of good itself, who makes that determination of who a good player is, or a good host, or a good speaker? And it's always important that when we are establishing those performance norms, we are able to sample a large sum, to understand the average of it. So again, World Cup, we'll consider to be the most competitive stage in international football. If FIFA then comes on and says, we want to understand what the competitiveness looks like at the World Cup level, and then call that the benchmark, where teams can then start to profile themselves, identify those performance gaps, and then progress towards that benchmark, it makes sense. But if we work in our own local environment here, and all we know is just we do, then we are just tempted to benchmark what we do here, but that may not be what's considered to be good, Right. So a good example, when I was little, in my class, I was always the first one. I thought I was good until I went to college. Same marks, but I wouldn't tell you, so you're gonna laugh at me, but I wasn't good.
The levels were different.
The level was different, exactly. So I went from a small pond, I thought I was the big fish, but then I went out there and I was different. So that aspect of what's considered to be good, and Owuraku also mentioned we are evolving. Again, if I narrow it down to football, every day something changes. So today we may consider this to be the performance norm, the good of everything, but tomorrow when the game evolves, how then do we know what's good today? It's not good anymore tomorrow, and that's the danger, and some key considerations that really becomes difficult to sort of measure when benchmarking or profiling.
Look, all of this is linked to sports, but even the more they speak, it's very practical and applicable to real life, right? Yeah. If you're able to profile your own self, you are able to tell what you are capable of doing to the max, and what you're not necessarily too good at. And earlier today, Derek Boateng spoke about the fact that after playing football, he chose to go into business by running his own hotel. He suddenly realized that, this is not for me. He needs to find his purpose. That is a sense of profiling. right? And then he's now setting a huge benchmark for himself for discovering some of the best talents. So it works across sports, but how about thinking about it also in real life application? That in everything you do, profile yourself, know your strength, know what you're capable of doing, and then set the highest benchmark you're capable of reaching it. All right, so, I mean, brilliant job by the two of you by explaining it. Even now that you've explained it, I understand it even more. And I hope you understand it. Brilliant.
No, we all do. I can add to this. At some point in your life, you do apply for jobs, right?
Yeah.
We all do.
Yeah.
And what do you think the companies would be doing?
They'll be profiling.
They're going to be profiling you,
Yeah.
and then, again, benchmarking you against the internal employees and the others that they are competing with. That's profiling and benchmarking. Why do they do that? Because, again, they want to maximize their performance. Same thing, and again, if I bring it into football, hiring a coach, talent identification, the players you are scouting, at some point we all do this. But how, again, accurate that is, because one single message or info could either make you or break you. It's the same thing.
Yeah. So yes, I was gonna go on that tangent. That listen, profiling, benchmarking is crucial, really. But normally, when you are dealing with up and coming talent, young ones, very young ones, I've always believed that yes, talents are people pick up their talents at different levels, right? Now, you might misprofile somebody at an age because maybe physically the person doesn't have it at that point, but give the person 2 more years, it's going to shoot up, right? You look at somebody's skill set at one point, you're thinking, he's not going to make it pro. 1 more year, the person's confidence is different and the person can do it. How do you make sure that in profiling, especially in sports, that in profiling these young talents, you're not throwing away what would have been a massive hit and then picking those who you find, good at the time you're profiling, and in the end, maybe then they don't even turn out to be what you expected them to be? How do you find that line?
The answer is we always get it wrong. As simple as that. Nobody gets it right. And it's a very good question. When I was working in the MLS as head of recruitment, I lost more players than I signed for the club.
Wow.
Because it's such a difficult job to do. Like, I don't even know what life is going to bring me in the next 48 hours. Whether I'm going to be alive or not, let alone predict the future of a player who is 8, 9, 10, 12. It's impossible to do. But that said, and this is where, again, data becomes important. Our guys from Opta here, they know everything about this. You just have to believe in what you think is right, but also be very objective with what you do. So if at some point you go through the journey, you identify a talent, okay, at this age, you progress, you develop, and then this, talent becomes a superhero or becomes a Messi in the future, it's important that you document the step. Because you've tested one, you want to try it again in a different player, in a different one, and then all of a sudden you are now starting to benchmark your own performance norms, what you consider to be good. Does it mean you're always going to get it right? No. Why? Because every single human being is different. And the environment we live in influences a lot of the stuff we do. But so long as you believe in what you're doing, you have the data to back it, then I'll tell you go for it. But also be aware you would get it wrong more than you would get it right. It's just how it goes.
All right, I come back to you, Reku.
I just wanted to quickly add on to that. It's an interesting question because how many of you watched the under-17 team back in 2016, 2017, 2018? Ghana's under-17 team.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. Mohamed Kudus wasn't one of the best players. In fact, if we are talking about that team, I don't think you mentioned Kudus' name in the top 3.
He had one opportunity where he had a terrible game. I also started, I was like, who is that guy? He doesn't deserve to be in the shirt.
Yeah.
And I'm for real. He was terrible on that day. If anybody told me that was going to be Kudus today, if I was a scout on that day, whoa.
Yeah, so it just ties into your point, and I think perhaps that could be the gap in performance training, performance scouting, in a sense that no matter how powerful technology is, there are just some factors that you cannot control.
Yeah.
For instance, you can only control as much as you can in a player's life. If a player starts to party from 10 to 4 a.m., and starts to do other things that takes his mind off. As Chibsah mentioned, we track the physical, which is easy to do, but the mental, that is so difficult. How do you tell that when this guy starts to get money, his life?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's extremely difficult to tell how progression and development would affect the mental side of the player. So I just wanted to touch on that fact that perhaps that's something that technology itself would solve eventually, or that could also come in later. But I think leadership, mental, psychological, all of these aspects, they're really, really difficult to track. And a lot of the advancement in technology has been more physical in recent times. So maybe in the future, we'll be able to track a lot more of these non-physical ones to make more informed decisions.
If we get, in the world where AI can track our mental, then I think I don't want to be alive. We are dead.
Right. Okay, so then, Owuraku, I stay with you on this one. I was going to ask you, you are the AFCON, and you've been to many competitions, right? In your line of reporting, how much do you use profiling and benchmarking? How do you tell which athlete or which player, how do you profile them? How do you also benchmark performance? How do you tell the Black Stars played well here and they didn't play well here, or they didn't do this well? How do you set those parameters?
Well, I think it contributes a lot, especially in the projections bit, because in the 2023 AFCON, I needed just one game to see that Ivory Coast had the potential of winning it. And even when they were not winning their second group game and the third group game, I still stood by my first tweet that I made after their first match, that looking at the underlying figures and even the games that they lost, they were creating chances. They were just nervous. And they just needed someone to calm them down. It wasn't a case of quality at all. And I'm one person who believes that over time, quality proves itself. Unlike the Black Stars, I needed just one game to know that Ghana won't go far. And if you watch our first game, there was no way you could miraculously believe that Chris Hughton would all of a sudden change the fundamental errors that we saw against Cape Verde. Right. And so there is a standard that something like benchmarking and profiling helps you to be able to make us a journalist, because the difference between you and a fan is that a fan is watching the game to enjoy it, but you should be able to see that, okay, although this team won by 6-0, if I'm looking at the benchmark of the quality of winners of the Euros, the quality of opposition means that we might be thinking too far ahead for this team, and hence I don't think they're a favorite. A fan will watch that game and say, whoa, they just scored 6-0, 5-0, Germany just beat Scotland. Automatically they are favorites for the competition without necessarily considering the strength of Scotland. And so those are some of the considerations that helps set you apart. And then there's also the player aspect where, for instance, working for Flashscore, one of the things that I had to do was coming up with a team of the tournament where you're creating a benchmark. So I remember I sent a message to Chibsah that, hi, in Wabai and then Ron Williams, these two goalkeepers, I cannot separate them. I think they both played 5 games, clean sheets, were very similar, but I had to choose one as the goalkeeper of the tournament. And in that moment, my ability to benchmark, I had a stop in front of me. And so, I went to seek for more advice, more counsel, which is also open to the performance norm. You can always look outside for literature and all that to make better informed decisions. And so, in the end, I came up with a team, which was okay. But recently in the Euros, just to wrap up, the Euros and the Copa America that just ended up, did a research work yesterday. I completed it for Flashscore, just making comparisons between the Euros and the Copa. And so you're looking at the expected goals metric, how teams performed against, how many goals they were supposed to score. And an interesting look is that Argentina, underperformed their XG woefully. I think almost a -5. But they still went on to win the competition just because of how good they are defensively. So, they weren't as clinical as someone like Spain, who also overperformed their XG by, I think, more than 3 as well. And then you have, the likes of England, who had like the 4th worst XG in the group stages, but managed to reach the tournament final. Once again, defying data and common sense. And as I mentioned, that's also another part. There's always a caveat, because yes, there's data, but there's also been track record of teams not necessarily following the patterns and projections that you do make as well. And so, these are some of the experiences that I've had. You're comparing Copa versus the Euros, is it average attendances, you're looking at different aspects of team performances, and also interestingly, the Premier League actually had 34 goal scorers from the Copa and then the Euros, which was the most by any league as well. And so it once again highlights the growth of the league, the quality of the league, and the distribution of the league as well, different parts of the world. And so, you learn a lot when you go through your benchmarking and then your profiling in the job as well. It's much more fun than the regular job when it's just reporting and doing news. When you add profiling, benchmarking, data, I think it's more engaging, and you're able to learn stuff that you yourself didn't even know could possibly exist.
Yeah, and when you report, people pay attention because they know you are. Listen, when you tweet, I read it. I gauge your tweets a lot, because when you tweet, it's a lot of facts. No question marks anywhere, because it's using a lot of facts to do so by using data. So it's important. But you work with CAF in the more recent AFCON in Cote d'Ivoire. Let's forget about the parts. Let's talk about the work. How did you use all the profiling and benchmarking to aid your work and achieve the results that you had?
Listen, after listening to this guy, I'm not sure how you get the 2 predictions right, but after a match fixing and betting discussion, integrity team, where are you? I got to report this guy here, but that's a joke, by the way. He's
man, top guy.
But yeah, so I was fortunate. I was a technical study group member for CAF, and our job was really to, again, if I'm coming from benchmarking, understand what football in Africa looks like. Again, when you ask many people, you're going to get different opinions. Not saying they are wrong or they are right, but at some point we have to be objective with what our football looks like. So our job was to sample all the games, all 52 games. And for every team, this is where profiling becomes important. We need to understand at any given moment in the game what the team is trying to do, how they are trying to implement the game plan, which area in the field, was it successful, was it not successful? So that alone is in the lines of profiling every single team. I really
want to read Ghana's technical reports from the group. Does they ever have that? That's just by the way.
No GFA member here, right?
Somewhere there. They are the GFA.
I didn't say. So yeah, we did it for every team. Yeah. We sent it out to every team, again, to help with their own self-analysis for talent development. But overall, from where CAF sits as the regulators of football and the confederation, we need to understand what our football looks like. And the only way to do that is to, again, profile and then benchmark. What was our benchmark? Our teams would be competing against the rest of the world in FIFA international competitions. So we were lucky enough to also have that report from the FIFA World Cup, which we consider to be the norm or the international standard that all teams should measure themselves to. But that allows us to feed back into the federations and the teams to say, this is where we are, okay, with our teams, and this is what's considered to be the standard at the international level. So where are the performance gaps? And that goes into training methodologies, training principles, developments, the next future that are coming in, and that's just the job we had to do there. So between profiling and benchmarking, we are also supporting talent development and the development of football overall on the continent. Not only federations, but also with clubs, because I'll give you a good example now, Ghana Premier League. Maybe I shouldn't talk about Ghana Premier League because it's too much Ghana stuff. But either way, Ghana Premier League, our clubs would compete in CAF competitions. Confederations Cup, Champions League. How informed are our clubs going into those competitions? What exactly do they know in terms of the game details, the components, how quick counterattacks are, how smaller boxes teams are operating in? If we start to benchmark and profile our own teams, we can start to identify those performance gaps now to support our teams. So this is something our federations should be doing on their own, because you really want to support your clubs to compete at that level and do better, just as we are doing from the FIFA level to the federations and the national teams.
Right. Now that we clearly understand what profiling is, what benchmarking is, do they work hand in hand? Do you have to do the profiling and set your benchmark? Do you have to set your benchmark and do the profiling? Is it separable?
Yeah. I think it's quite clear. You can't separate the two, especially in the context of sports. You need to understand who you are, where you are, okay? But then measure that against your desired outcome. And that's where the benchmarking comes in. So you can't separate the two. You can't do profiling without benchmarking, and you can do benchmarking without profiling, because you need to understand what's considered to be good, what's accepted to be the performance norm, and then you can, again, profile yourself to understand where you are and how you can progress or develop to get there. So you just can't separate the two.
Right. We've got two more questions, then I wrap the session up. But I'll take, this question goes to the two of you. Owuraku first, then. Now, when you set a benchmark, and when you were speaking, I picked the sense that you set your benchmark against what we saw at the FIFA World Cup. It is considered the standard. It's almost as if maybe down in Africa, we are almost playing the catch-up. We are always having to set a benchmark. We always have to look at another standard to set our benchmark. What do we do to be the benchmark? Or what do we do? We want to be there. We want to achieve that excellence. We don't always want to be using another standard to be our we want them to look at us and say that's the benchmark. Well, anyway, I thought that the Euros should have considered how we hosted the AFCON as the benchmark. Leaky stadiums and all of that. Yeah, I mean, the AFCON, that's the benchmark now. Copa America should copy how we host the AFCON benchmark. But yeah, how do we become the benchmark? Or how do we reach that level in science and equilibrium? How do we reach there?
Well, I think we need to close the gap on many fronts. First thing that you mentioned was facility, and the truth is that if you look around in Africa, majority of our countries just don't have good pitches. For me, I think the pitch is the most important thing for a footballer. Forget about the boots, forget about the jersey. It's almost like the canvas or the crayons that you give to an artist. It's almost like the microphone or sound system that you give to a musician. We all saw what happened to Kim Promise at the beginning of the TGMAs. People said all of a sudden he was bad and he didn't deserve Artist of the Year. Yeah. This was someone who was being touted as the favorite before that performance. Just because the sound was bad, he looked bad. And I think that's the influence that some of these factors can actually have on our teams, in the sense that we're bringing up national teams who are not used to good pitches, don't get that proper exposure, also do not get enough technical teaching and education. So by the time they get to the top level, the education and the quality gap is just a bit too much. Because right now you're looking at the Spain team that just won the Euros. If you look at someone like Lamine Yamal, his life has been very well documented. This guy joined La Masia before he was probably 8, 9, and has had high quality education. Our best player in Mohamed Kudus only got to Europe about 6 years ago. And so although Kudus may be very, very talented, his exposure came in late. Is it a case that we can develop our facilities here in the sense that our players at age 9, 10 can start getting the European level of education, so that by the time it gets to 21, 22 and we are facing each other in the World Cup, we're all equally as good. Yeah. So I just feel there's a huge handicap which we also need to consider when we are benchmarking, because I just think it would be a bit unfair to say that 2026, an African team should aim to win the World Cup. Because statistically, Ghana were the last, quarterfinalists, and then Morocco semifinalists. We just do not go deep in the competition. But I think that's beginning to change. That's beginning to change because of globalization, where we're seeing a lot more of our players travel to Europe, get that education, get the exposure. And so I think it will take time, but if we want to fast track it, then we also need to meet it halfway. We need to invest in our sport and make sure that we close the gap quickly.
Chibsah?
Yeah. How can Africa be considered as the benchmark?
Yeah. I'll be right up there. The benchmark.
Yeah, so this is where I would put my high performance hat on and then say, to be considered good, you have to fall within the top, performing teams. So very simple. How many teams went to the World Cup? 36.
Yeah.
Right? If we take the average of the qualitative and quantitative performance of the teams, how many African teams would be in the top half? Which we did. Only one. Morocco. Right? Everybody else was in a lower percentile. So again, based on, this is me being objective here, it's not what I'm saying, it's just the numbers are saying. With a lot of our teams being in a lower percentile, it's tough to say African teams should be considered, or what we do here should be considered as the benchmark. And it all comes down to results. At the top level, elite level, it's all about results. And if you're not performing in that top percentile, then it's tough, to say that what we do here should be considered as one of the benchmark. What we do contributes in determining what's good or what's accepted. But if we want to be considered as the gold standard, then obviously our teams need to be performing in the, I'll say, the top half of the table.
All right, then to the final question. How can sports clubs and organizations use profiling and benchmarking to optimize performance?
Again, for me, I'm a very, very objective guy, and our guys from Opta here, again, I've mentioned for the third time, we all have our opinions, not to say everybody's wrong or right. What you think is what you think, that's your perspective. But at some point, we have to draw the line between being subjective and objective. So if we can start to measure a lot of the stuff we do here, then we can begin to say, okay, we are being true to ourselves. If not, then we're going to keep working the way we are, and it's just going to be subjective, try and error, without really establishing what's true and what's considered to be the gold standard. So for many domestic clubs, the collection of data, not just collecting, but analyzing and interpreting that into knowledge, and then feeding back into the workforce is so, so crucial. Good example, domestic Premier League. How many of us are measuring where goals are coming from? How many of us are measuring how compact teams are defending? Because again, we need to understand that and then interpret that into knowledge, into our education system. If it's in football, that's coach education. We develop knowledge from there. And that feeds back into the whole coaching workforce. And then the coaches take that to develop the players that we have. That for me is the process. But it all starts from collecting the data first, educating the people that are working in that workforce, and continuing to develop knowledge every now and then, because football continues to evolve every single day, and we can just do it now and then go back to bed and think this is the gold standard. It just has to keep evolving every single day.
Owuraku gets the final word on it. How do we use profiling benchmarking to optimize performance in sports and everywhere?
I think even beyond sports is extremely important. For some reason in Ghana, we're very fixated on the other half. That's benchmarking, performance, results. I need you to be the best media house in Ghana. I need you to run the best club page in the Ghana Premier League. That's all you're told. But how many of these employers actually know the strengths and weaknesses of the people that they hire to work? For instance, there are organizations where one person, because the person said he can take a picture, that person is a photographer, is a videographer, is an editor, he will finish and he will post it, he will do SEO. It's not possible. This person you cannot benchmark this against a company that has 5 different people doing these jobs. And so I think maybe there's a need for that education, that companies need to actually understand the people that work for them. You need to know that, okay, this guy is good at this, this not too good at this. And so the next person I'm employing should be able to complement his weakness here, and then that way, it's almost like a puzzle, a logo where you are arranging to make it fit. That is how football teams make it work. And that's how companies also have to approach, the market. Instead of piling one thing on one person and then hoping by some miracle that the person will be able to execute them and reach the benchmark. I think it's very important that we also take the profiling very serious. The key takeaway, profiling has to do with behavior. And so why does this journalist talk more than write? Then you would realize that, his strengths are in talking, and maybe his weakness is in writing. Benchmark is performance. Now, if this journalist is speaking, doing his analysis, what makes him a good journalist? Is he better than the people that you've seen, or the average number? That's where the comparison comes in. But when it comes to profiling, there's no comparison. Everyone's strengths and weaknesses are different, and so you look at it individually. Benchmark is where the comparisons do come in.
Brilliant stuff, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for paying attention to